Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Jump Scares, because loud, sudden noises are easier than writing a good movie. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by PediaEase. Even the village idiot can't mess up a cure this simple. Feel better with PediaEase.
Have you seen the movie?
Yeah. Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers. We do a lot all over the place. I'm in pre-production for some short films and also in post-production for a corporate project. We use all that kind of knowledge as a means of discussing film and analyzing it, busting it up to some degree or another, and just kind of seeing what makes it tick, what makes it work. What are we doing today, man?
Today we are doing The Sixth Sense. So if you haven't seen this film, please pause this episode and go watch it. We're going to spoil everything, and this is a big spoiler film. So please pause the episode, go watch it. Yeah,
this is one that we've probably been dancing around since the first episode, and so it'll be nice to actually just talk about it. And we'll cover a handful of things, not a ton on the agenda for me anyway. We'll look at some of the cinematography, reveals, coverage, theatrical flair, and there's a pun there, and as well as some of the writing and directing, pacing, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. Can't even give anything away in the synopsis, huh? Malcolm Crowe, a child psychologist, starts treating a young boy, Cole, who encounters dead people and convinces him to help them. In turn, Cole helps Malcolm reconcile with his estranged wife. It's written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan. Cinematography by Fujimoto, featuring Bruce Willis as Malcolm, Haley Joel Osment as Cole's Sear, Toni Collette as Cole's mom, and Olivia Williams as Anna.
Grandma says hi. She says she's sorry for taking the bumblebee pendant. She just likes it a lot.
What?
Grandma comes to visit me sometimes.
Cole, that's very wrong. Grandma's gone, you know that.
I know. She wanted me to tell you.
Cole, please
She wanted
stop.
me to tell you she saw you dance. She said, when you were little, you and her had a fight right before your dance recital. You thought she didn't come to see you dance. She did. She hid in the back so you wouldn't see. She said you were like an angel. She said you came to the place where they buried her. Asked her a question. She said the answer is every day. What did you ask?
Do I make her proud?
I started crying during that scene. That's the best scene of the whole movie. I'm so glad that you...
The whole movie, bro. Like, she does some... I mean, obviously, Haley Joel Osment is otherworldly. But Toni Collette is the heartbeat of the whole movie. Like, I forget just how incredible she is in this movie. And she only has, you know, a small chunk of scenes where she gets to turn it on. But, oh my God, she is... And the technical things she's kind of doing even in that scene, like, if you want to give someone a look and really give like a profound, like, what, a whoa kind of like look of shock, like you have to, but the problem is she wanted to give him that look, but she was already looking at him. How do you deliver that look when you're already looking at someone? You look away. And so she finds a moment to look away so that whenever he drops the line that's like revelatory, she can now look back and give him that look. Like the technical things that are just so fluid, they're so ingrained and lived in. That's just a professional at the top of their craft. God, what do you think of this movie? Toni, Collette, the whole thing, man. Does this hold up? I guess is my other question. Like it's been over 20 years now. How does it live now?
Well, first off, yes, Toni Collette is my favorite part of this whole movie, and I didn't even recognize her.
Right.
I didn't, I'm pretty good, I think, at recognizing people. I mean, Bruce Willis is Bruce Willis. He's always looked exactly the same. But Toni Collette, like, I mean, she felt familiar, but I remember thinking when because I haven't seen this movie in, 2 decades almost. Like, I remember seeing her as you see her as the mom in that first, I guess, scene when she's doing the laundry or whatever. And anyway, and I remember thinking, okay, she's just an ancillary character. I didn't remember how important she was. And I didn't know that it was Toni Collette. Toni Collette as in like Hereditary Toni Collette, right? And I mean, like, my God, she looks pretty different. But anyway, and I didn't realize how heavy of a role she played. And so I was just kind of like operating with like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to the kid. I'm going to pay attention to Bruce Willis. Like those were the things. And then they started giving her more scenes, more moments of like, oh, she's doing the laundry and she's looking at the pictures of him and she sees the little light in the photographs and that she notices. I'm like, okay. But I noticed that was an idea of like developing her character, that scene was to develop the mom. She's doing, cleaning up his room and she finds his writings. That's also, yes, it furthers his character, the kid's character, but it further cements her and her involvement in him. And then the scene with the doctor, M. Night Shyamalan, that's M. Night Shyamalan, the doctor, her talking to the doctor. I'm like, oh, they're giving her a lot. Okay. So I'm, a quarter of the way, halfway into the movie, and I'm thinking, oh, she's pretty important. She's pivotal to this film. So I guess the point is that it was a wonderful, the experience for me watching it this time, knowing already that Bruce Willis's character is dead. And what am I going to get out of it was the re-realization of how important the mom is throughout the whole film. It was like, I was like, oh, okay. She's still there. She's still there. They're coming back to her. And how great that was. Your point is totally spot on. I feel like this is just as much a story of her and her dealing with being a single mom, having to work at the same time as having to take care of her son, who is going through something that she doesn't know or understand. She can't force it out of him. She just has to love him. She's a normal human being who gets mad, and they don't shy away from that, but then feels awful about it. That is every parent. You will, if you do not ever get mad at your kids and maybe raise your voice at times or get frustrated or short with them, then you're not human, right? It's just going to happen. But in a scenario like this, where you have this really sweet kid who we know as a character, as the audience, is going through something very traumatic, right? We don't necessarily fully know what it is, but we know that it's a lot. We kind of know what it is, but we know it's a lot. So we have sympathy for the kid, but how does the mom, who has zero idea, deal with the kid not, seemingly maybe stealing her things, the pendant, the bumblebee pendant, being quiet and going through like this traumatic stuff and crying all the time and being scared all the time. How does that mom be empathetic to the kid without asking anything of him? Like, what's wrong? And he can't tell her. So anyway, the film to me was less about Bruce Willis's character and his story arc for me, and more about the mom this time. Maybe because now I'm a parent and watching it is different. So in that regard, I feel like it held up really well. I feel like the way that the cinematography was really great. I mean, the scene with the doctor is a great example of using foreground to place you in a place. Like, they could have been in any room. They could have been in this room, just take in my room, just take all the stuff out, right? And you put like one of those little block things with the metal bars on it, like that kids play with in a doctor's office, in front of the camera, and you're shooting into that to both the doctor and to the mom. Now all of a sudden we're in a pediatric doctor's office. Like, that's something that anybody can do.
Yeah.
And it's a brilliant use of a small space, right? If they have a small space. The iconic shot of Cole when he tells him that he's, that he can see dead people, like in the doctor's office with the blanket, is a beautiful shot, beautiful setup. All the setups leading up to us finding out that Bruce Willis's character is actually dead, where he doesn't interact, like he never actually speaks to anybody, but we don't really notice that because we're just put in these scenarios having no idea how he gets there or how he leaves. Him sitting in the room with the mom when Cole comes home is a great example of that. Imagine, seeing this in a theater, having no idea what to expect. They're just sitting there. You expect that maybe something was said and they're just waiting for Cole to come home. And, they're just sitting in silence, awkward silence, right? And so she's taking this opportunity to stand up when Cole gets home to get out of that awkward silence and go over to him. And so and then there's another great scene is the one where he comes to dinner. He goes to dinner with his wife. She's sitting there in silence. You can tell that she's quote unquote, or you think that she's mad and that's why she's quiet. And then they bring the check. He reaches for it, but she grabs it. And then she looks up a couple of times.
It's cued on laughter in the background. Like, the motivation for her character is actually to look at what was so funny up there.
Yeah.
But for the scene, it just looks like, to your point,
it just looks like she's looking up at Malcolm, and then her not looking up and saying happy anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
We know now she was just having an anniversary dinner with herself, because she misses him. But like to us in the moment, we're thinking that she's speaking to him and she's giving him a little snide remark of like, thanks for showing up, asshole, and it was really, really well done.
Nice.
Anyway, so yeah, great. It was great, but for a very different reason for me.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I think I feel like I watched this recently within the last 3 or 4 years, but suddenly watching it this time felt really different. I don't know what it was, but I thought I could see the dating on this movie a lot clearer than like we did Crimson Tide a few weeks ago. It didn't feel dated at all. It felt like you could throw that in a cinema right now. This, I feel like you throw it in a cinema, people are going to know they're watching a classic. There's something with the cinematography, the lighting, and the music. Even the score felt very of its time. Not that it's a bad score, it just felt very dated. It felt like, okay, this is playing on all the traditional cues. I think ghost stories are really, really hard to do in any era, but especially now. We've seen it all. How do you surprise us? Because a film this slow, and one of the cool things about this movie is I don't think there are any visual effects. Like, as far as they go, is like breathing, like the cold breath, but that's like a practical thing, right? Everything else is just makeup. Even whenever he finds out he's a ghost, in my head, there's like this moment where he looks at his hand and it's transparent, but that's not the case. He's just looking at his hand and just doesn't have the ring on it. Like, there are no, from what I can tell or what I can remember, I didn't pick up on any visual effects, and every other ghost movie does some kind of visual effect to make it feel big budget Hollywood story. And this relied solely on the performances and the writing. And even if I didn't necessarily love all the cinematography on just a pure aesthetic basis, it's still perfect. It's still telling the story exactly the way it needs to be told. It's like even shooting in the car, that scene we shot, I can imagine that's one of those, it's a special car. You're removing the front end of that car so that you can get the camera just into the right position for both of them. There might even be two different cars, one where half the roof is gone so that whenever you're shooting him, you can get the camera into position, because it looks like a little bit longer lens, maybe not like super long, but I would imagine that thing's at least a 35 or 24, somewhere in there. But the angle just felt like they need a little extra room. Maybe not, I don't know, but the angle on her definitely looked like it was coming from the dashboard. And so that's just a lot of money to get just the right shot. If that's the direction they went. I don't know that they did. That's just me guessing. They do that a lot in films though, where you just chop the front end of a limo off and now you're just can light it and get all your gear in just the way you want. Your camera operator isn't fighting shadows to get into the right position. It just pays dividends, oddly, to spend whatever $200,000 on a $20,000 car to get it just so that you can fly things out and move doors out on, in 20 seconds. But yeah, I think it still works. Like, it's still such a good, compelling movie for me, because all the performances are so even keel. Like Bruce Willis and Haley Joel Osment, their characters don't allow them to do a lot all the time. Like Haley Joel Osment has a few moments where he can burst out, right? The stuttering Stanley moment is just very loud and grating. You're like, oh my God, like someone just stop. But it's a good moment to kind of demonstrate how much he's struggling with and what he's combating with. But otherwise, all the emotions coming from Toni Collette, like even Olivia Williams as Anna, Malcolm's wife, like we barely get to see her face, let alone listen to her talk. And so there's not a lot she can do. Now, if you're an actor where we can not see your face and not hear your voice, and you can still influence the film on an emotional level, my God, your hair must be something else, or your hands or something. I don't know what you're doing, and so there's just not a lot for everyone else to do. And Toni Collette really steps in to fill in a lot of the emotional elements. Every freak out, every time, like you said, she's struggling to raise his son by herself, 2 jobs, and to connect. And so every time she, as the mom, gets to step in and like feel the emotions that no one else gets to feel in the film, it really compounds. Like it's all been compounding, and she's like this valve where it just all comes out. And that's a lot. That's a lot to take on as an actor. But my God, if
Very
anyone
much.
can.
And then there were some moments for me too where I was like, my God, nobody talks like this. The ring moment where Anna is selling the ring to that couple. I mean, first, I thought, okay, this is cheesy and I don't believe it. But then I realized, like, this didn't even need to really be there. Like, they didn't need that. They don't need to introduce these ancillary characters that have nothing to do with anything just to make some kind of to give her some kind of monologue that
about the imprint.
Kind of, it's like, we know that she misses Malcolm. Like, it's obvious. We don't need her to. Anyway, I thought that was a throwaway scene for sure. But yeah, there were some moments where I thought like that, nobody talks like that, but I did really like the sound on this, and I really liked a lot of the delivery of the lines, that they were just quiet. It was all very quiet. Which made the louder moments like the stuttering Stanley and like a few others like really jump out, I mean, jump scares, I can't stand jump scares. I think they're lazy. I mean, as we, the intro, mentioned, I think they're lazy and boring and done. But remember, when this came out as well. And so there were a few in here, but it just makes them even more, of a thing when all of the conversation that happens between Malcolm and Cole is all whispering.
Mm.
It's barely, I mean, the way we're talking now is way louder than what they were talking, in how they were talking in the film. And just the quality of the sound is so crisp and beautiful. It's, and again, I mean, we've talked about this, about like some older films, 20, 30 years old, that for some reason the sound is just so much clearer, I guess is a good way to say. I'm not sure. It's just, it's not like it's like shrill, but it's just really, I feel like it's natural and feels well done. More so than a lot of newer films that I think rely on too much music, and too much sound design. I feel like this was very much about conversation. And so all of the emphasis was put on, dialogue and capturing dialogue in a great way.
Completely agree. Like even that moment, right, when Malcolm is listening to the old tape of Vincent Gray, like by being so disciplined with all the other audio around it, now whenever you crank up the audio to a 10, right, and it's so funny, he starts at a 2, and he goes all the way to a 10, and you hear the noise level rise, and that kind of discipline with the rest of the film really helps that pop out and makes it feel like he's turned this way the hell up. It's just the sound design is really fantastic on this whole thing. And the pacing too. I really do love the pacing. Like it's very deliberate and slow, especially on Cole. Like everything he says, super like thoughtful, but even more than that, deliberate. Like he's weighing every single word he says around everyone because he doesn't know who's trusting him, who's going to label him a freak, and just the emotional vulnerability really comes through in his delivery, in his pacing. Like he waits, he thinks, he decides to respond, then finally speaks. Like it's just this whole process that he's got a lot going on inside, and just by pacing it the way they do, you can tell he's got a lot going on inside.
I mean, you're totally right. A great example of that for me was when Cole gets home after, like, when he and his mom are sitting there in there,
they're playing
and
the
Cole
game,
says,
the mind reading game.
The mind reading game. I think it's a great example of that, where he says, "I'm going to read your mind." Blah blah blah. He goes through the whole thing, and the setup with his fingers on his his temples, and then brings his hands together, takes a beat, and then says a thing. Like it's a long process, but we stay with him. We don't do a million cuts. We're just in the space with him. And because it takes a while, or because there's not as many cuts, we feel like we're really in this conversation. We're not cheating time at all with cuts, because cuts sometimes can feel like you're cheating time without you knowing it.
Yeah.
Like if we had 3 different angles of him, it would feel, but it still took the same amount of time. It would feel very different, because we would feel like we're cheating time a little bit.
Absolutely.
Because it feels like the camera is moving, or that we're getting a different angle, so we have to feel something a little different. So it's just, but they stay on him in that one shot. And I think we only have like really 3 shots. We have a shot on Cole, we have a shot on Malcolm, and then we have a foot shot on Cole as he takes steps forward or back. That's really it, right? So we're just living in this space with them, and it's just a great example of like my favorite, one of my favorite examples of acting. Let's just say, is it like up there? It's up there with me. Is when Malcolm dies. In the moment when he dies, he goes from, because the camera's right on his face and they don't cut away. He says, "It's fine. It doesn't even hurt anymore." And then he dies. But that's how you die on camera. You just do nothing. You don't go, "Oh," or like sag different. It was, I was watching it. I watched it like 3 times thinking, how do I feel like I see his soul leave his body? I really felt like that. I felt like, oh, there it is. There it is. That's the moment right there. And every time it was the exact same moment. I was like, that's the moment. That was a great piece of acting to go from doing so little already to being dead is so hard to do on camera when the camera is 6 inches from your face, you know? And he just nailed that. Like very few other, it's one of my favorite death scenes ever because it's so underdone.
Yeah.
You know, honestly. So Bruce Willis just destroyed this role for me.
Absolutely. Like the pacing, I think, is also important because imagine if we're not doing those things that we're talking about, where we're not taking our time. Now you're kind of rushing through, and what you're doing is kind of destroying all the grounding of this world. Like it feels suddenly melodramatic. Like if he just walks up and hands that dad the box at the funeral and says, your daughter wanted you to have this, and walks away. Like it feels undercooked. It feels flimsy and fake. And, you know, whereas if he's taking his time, now you begin to anticipate. And it's that little moment of like, okay, what is he going to say? And you're tuning in. Everything you're talking about, like the more you have to sit and focus and concentrate, the more it pulls you into the story. Now you feel like you're there. Whereas if you don't do those things, not only do you not feel like you're there, you feel like you're watching a movie with a bunch of bad acting because the lines, the dialogue sometimes is so like specific to this universe that you're like, no one talks like that. But if you take a really long time to say it, suddenly they talk like that.
Yeah.
The other thing too.
And that is a great example when Cole gives the dad the box.
Mm-hmm.
We never see the dad's face until the dad is watching the video. They just stay on Cole the whole time. Cole walks through the room, you know, and the dad is just staring down, doesn't look up at Cole at all until Cole says something. And then he looks up. And normally we would have like a reverse cut, maybe a dirty over the shoulder of Cole or something, or maybe a single of the dad's face or something. But we don't see the dad at all. The dad is not part of the story yet. The story is Cole completing this task of helping this girl, by giving the box to the dad. And it's not until the dad, you know, we don't see it happen, but it's not until the dad actually like, well, I guess we do see it happen. He takes the box and he opens the thing.
But
then
it's still over the shoulder.
It's still over the shoulder. We don't see the dad's face at all until it's the dad's story, which is when he's watching the video.
Yes. And
that is a great storytelling.
It is. This whole film is all about perspective. Whoever is the main focus of the scene, it's their perspective. When Malcolm is in the room, we're seeing it from his perspective. When he's not in the room, it's either going to be Cole's perspective or Cole's mom. And whenever they're none of it, then it's Anna. Like perspective is shifting all over the place. And sometimes you think you're watching it from one perspective to realize you're actually seeing it from another. Because there's that scene, the continuation of that ring scene that you were talking about. We're watching later on in the day in the store. Anna is talking with that guy that looks like he's trying to hit on Anna. And we think we're just entering this moment until you realize, oh, Malcolm is watching this whole time, right? With the window break. And now the perspective suddenly shifts to, we were seeing someone else's point of view. We didn't realize. And there's so many things. For one, the patience, going back to that just for a second, is also really important, because if you start cutting around, like you were talking about, if you have, 4 other angles and you're cutting around all this, every single cut that you make is energy. You're creating energy with every single cut. And if you're not doing that intentionally, you can be creating energy as an excuse because you're insecure about your story. Like Shyamalan was very secure about the story he's telling. He's not worried about boring the audience. And there's a lot of people who edit around something that's happening because they're afraid that their story isn't compelling enough, that it's not engaging enough. So to keep my audience engaged, I'm going to cut to something else. Instead of the Walter Murch style is only cut if there's something else you want to show. And until there's something else you want to show, do not cut. And so every single cut should advance the story, not just always be for visual interest. Now, sometimes there's a time and place for that. But if you're confident in your story and you're shooting it the way you want, you don't want that energy, especially in that moment when they're on the couch. And this is not about creating energy. It's about trying to calm everything down. It's about him trying to engage with this kid. And so you can see the camera moves are very, very smooth. Like even, and I love that little shot, that reverse POV, where he starts backing away and then the camera backs away. It's a beautiful cut. It's a beautiful camera move, because the cut goes from him, the close up of his feet stepping back, but before it finishes its step, we cut to that reverse angle in the move so that we can feel his momentum that we left in the last edit being completed with the camera move in the next edit.
Oh my gosh. Then it doesn't feel like, oh man. Yeah. It's
continuous.
That's brilliant. It's not like he takes the step and then he's already there when we cut back to the wide of him.
Yeah.
It's both shots complete the step.
Correct.
Dude,
yes.
that is awesome.
It's so good. Like, it's smart. It's a whole team saying we need this shot, and an editor saying yeah, and we need to do this to really make you feel what's happening in this moment. Like, because then the shot itself, right, is Malcolm getting smaller in the frame, he's retreating. All these things that you don't want to happen in this moment are now happening, and it's emotionally compelling. Like, but if you're not patient with the rest of the setup, it loses some of its punch. Because now there's energy as he's moving away. That's the energy you want. You don't want the energy to come from these edits. It's really smart filmmaking. Like, it's a really well-made film.
Amazing.
Even if not the prettiest thing in the world. There are some pretty shots in there for sure, but on the whole. The other thing, just to touch on Anna again, as we were talking about her, I was like, man, there's a whole other perspective of this movie that's just hers, which is if you take away the idea that Malcolm is kind of haunting her, the other perspective, one that and maybe this brings more relevance to the conversation with the ring in the store. She's talking about how souls can imprint, people who held things can imprint their soul on a whatever. And then you factor in the fact that she was holding onto that ring for so long. There's a whole story arc that says on the opposite side, she's keeping Malcolm from moving on. It's not until she releases the ring that she gives him permission to leave. And that's an interesting perspective too.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, right. That's
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of layers going on here for sure. Probably more than I was ready to give it credit for walking into this episode.
Yeah, I know. No, I mean, I believe that because I mean, she's constantly watching their wedding video. She can't like get into another relationship with this other guy. Like, exactly. She just feels guilty. She goes and has, anniversary dinner by herself. She has not let him go. And maybe that's why Malcolm doesn't realize that he's dead.
Yeah.
Either, so yeah, anyway,
that's cool.
Cool perspective.
So, just to run through some other cinematography notes, the camera is often floating around. It's very ghost-like. Not all the time, but they pick a lot of shots, a lot of moments to let it float around. Like when early on, our first kind of paranormal moment is maybe not the very first is the opening shot in the wine cellar. Whenever Anna goes down and she suddenly catches a chill, and I don't remember if she breathes in or breathes out some frosted breath, but if nothing else, she caught a chill, and it's like, oh, there's a ghost there that will be revealed upstairs, because that guy just draws them. Like these people draw ghosts to them. And so Donnie Wahlberg, by the way, oh my God, like that guy.
That's who that was?
That's who that was, Vincent Gray.
Oh my God.
He's
so good.
And so they let the camera float around whenever Cole's mom goes to get a new tie for him. Is that what it was? He's at the breakfast table. She walks out, comes back in, and all the cabinets are open. And the camera is just floating through the space to represent a ghost being present. Same thing with the anniversary dinner with Anna at the table. As the camera's moving in, that is not rock solid. It's hovering a lot and just kind of bobbing just slightly, maybe a little dutching on the axis. And it's him. He's the ghost, obviously, in that scenario.
Wow.
Yeah. Cole and Malcolm walking. It's not clear if it's after school or on the way to school or they just go for walks sometimes. But we're across the street when that whole moment begins, and we float across the street to them. When we get to them, the camera solids up quite a bit. It's still a little tiny floaty, but to me, it just feels handheld at that point, as opposed to this other kind of ethereal energy that they're giving the camera. And same thing when the father confronts the mother at the funeral. That's another little floaty moment between the two of them. And that's like, Kyra is there now witnessing this moment and kind of getting her release and her piece. So I feel like when they float the camera in this very specific stylistic way, they're representing some ghost figure in the moment. There's a reveal here, and this kind of goes to the idea that there's no special or visual effects in this film. And I love how they do this one reveal with the dead girl in the blanket fort church thing. The clothespins start popping off, and then we tilt down to reveal the girl vomiting. Like, that's really nice. There's no visual effects. It's just a camera move. It's just a camera reveal. And the look on her face as well as the look on his face. Like, the performance is carrying the reveal. They didn't just suddenly like ghost her into the scene. She was just sitting there waiting for her moment, on camera. But because of the way they shoot it and the acting, and the other effect of he's looking up, and we're motivating the camera to look up and see the camera, the clothespins popping off, and then we tilt down and she's suddenly there, and it's all being followed through his flashlight. It just feels like she suddenly popped up there, even though there's no effect. It's just good choreography.
Awesome.
Love that. There's that other scene with that same little girl is Misha Barton, by the way, very young Misha Barton. And whenever he goes into her bedroom and she grabs his leg, that shot afterwards, whenever he's backed against the wall, they get a lot of coverage. And this is one of those things that you can do in any film. And it just takes a little bit of thought and belief in yourself. A lot of the way people shoot is to cover up their inability to choreograph a scene. And if you feel like, I don't know how to make all these elements pop together into one shot, instead, I'll just do inserts. And now you can cut around it. Whereas if you tie them all together, it gives a much more cohesive feeling, and it feels more cinematic. I know that's a word that gets completely obliterated and abused in online culture, but
nobody knows what it means
anymore, right? It just almost lost all meaning. This is one of those things that can create a sense of cinema that makes it feel like a completely planned production, and it pulls you in to the story, as opposed to all those other things where you're just cutting around. Again, contextually, there's always a time and a place to do these other things. And for me, I love if you can get coverage all in one shot by moving the camera around, allowing the performers to perform, and believing that you can direct the scene and the pacing. And so we go from him against the wall. We start this shot, him against the wall, and then we pan over to her. She's under the bed. And then we tilt down and she pushes the box towards him. And then we move back to him. We tilt and pan over to him, and then we push in on him to get his reaction. That's all one shot. But in your mind, you see like 4 different cuts. You see that first shot on him, you see the second shot on her, you see the third shot on the box, then you see the 4th shot of a close-up on him. But that's all one camera move. It's all one thing. And if you can just think around what is the story here, you can create a sense of compelling the viewer to not look away, to not blink. And that's the other nice thing about not having an edit. It pulls your audience in so much further whenever you can just keep the action moving without needing to cut. Cut if you need to, but not because you feel like you just can't make it work, ideally. Another little thing that they do, this is flair, theatrical flair, is the road flare. At the end, when that conversation happens with his mom in the car, we start that scene at a traffic accident. And that moment starts with a flare being lit right there on the side of the road. I can't imagine any reason they need to light up a road flare in the middle of the daytime for a car accident. Like, what practical purpose could that serve? Now, if you're a cop in Philadelphia, and you're like, no, that's standard practice, bro. Like, okay, I'm open to that, but my suspicion is road flares are for nighttime. That's their function. But it's a great way to start the scene. It's visually compelling, and it gives us a reason to move the camera because we start there, and you immediately understand the context of the scene. Something's happened. And now you're motivating the camera because the flare starts to move away and we move with it until we peel off and start following someone else. And then we keep moving down the cars and you're just slowly building up this whole scene that gets paid off, of course, with the dead girl outside the window and blah, blah, blah. It's really good. It's fun. That's why Shyamalan does what he does, right? Like, I don't need these things, but it's theatrical and it's interesting. Let's do it. Last few notes here. The kid with the wound in the back of his head, first off, gross. But it actually really helps tell the story because showing him clean in front and then a big mess in the back helps you understand what happens later in the story with Malcolm, who is also clean in front. That's why we never saw him bleed out like all the rest of these ghosts. It's because he had that same deal with the kid, the messes in the back. And so there's like this simple visual tie that helps you buy in a little bit more to why Malcolm is a ghost and why you didn't pick up on it. There was no cheating. It's a hat tip to say, we didn't cheat. Like this is consistent with the rest of the story we're telling. Yeah. The other cool thing story-wise is the first time you're watching this, there's a question in the viewer's mind. And we can't recreate it because once you know the big punchline, it's all over. But the first experience is asking this question of, is Cole really experiencing ghosts or is this a psychological hallucination? Because this is all being told from the perspective of a psychologist. So we don't know if this is a supernatural story or not. And so when Cole starts experiencing some of these things, you're like, well, that's really freaky. But I guess we don't really know yet. And it's not until, of course, the big reveal where you do know. But there is this question on second viewing that begins to happen, which is how you read not just all those interactions, but the interactions between Malcolm and Cole himself. Because certain things that Cole says, you're like, well, wait, does he know? Or is he not sure? And like the first moment when they meet in church, right? And Malcolm or Cole is wearing the glasses, but he doesn't have the lenses on. I feel like that's kind of a hat tip to he can't really see what's happening, but he's not entirely sure because there's that moment before he leaves Malcolm where Cole asks, I'm going to see you again, aren't I? You could take that two ways. Like one, oh, I'm going to have to deal with this doctor a lot. That's how we take it on the first viewing. On second viewing, you can be like, oh, he's getting comfortable with dealing with a ghost. Like, and now you can read all the dialogue and the lines as someone who's finally not scaring the crap out of this kid, but also that he actually likes and he trusts and he's like, you're the only one that can help me. Like every time he says you in this movie, you can take that as you Malcolm or you ghosts in general. Right. That's a royal you, man.
I like it.
And the other fascinating aspect of this whole thing is Malcolm, being the psychologist, helps kids by listening to them. And now he's trying to get Cole to do the same thing, right? He needs to help Cole listen to ghosts so that he can help them. It's like he's passing on his skill set as a psychologist onto this kid. And that's a way to give him his own coping mechanisms. I think there's some layer here that I can't quite 100% pin down that's about therapy helping people become their own therapist. And that's how you win as a therapist, is helping people create these new skill sets in themselves. And I think that's just a fascinating, like, thematic element to help tell the story. The other thing is this movie, there's not a lot to it. I mean, yeah, there's no visual effects, but it's also just super, super simple. And the reason that it blew up, of course, is because Malcolm was dead the whole time, right? That doesn't catch people off guard. It doesn't really work as well if you don't make them feel like there's another story. And it's the feeling of finality when you resolve Cole's issue and get him to talk to his mom that makes you feel like, okay, this was a simple like story about a boy and his mom. Cool. That's really good. And it was emotionally satisfying. Cool. And it's where you drop your sense of safety. You're like, okay, we got through this thing. Cool. That's when they wind up and hit you with the real punch, right? With Malcolm. And of course, that's why everyone was really guarded about. I remember when this came out, people would say, have you seen Sixth Sense? Like, yeah, what's it about? Just go see it.
Yeah, just go watch it.
Just go watch it. Because of that moment, you want people to experience that moment. This is a big reason why, I'm big on spoilers. Like, it's just so, you can't recreate that experience. Yeah. You either get to have that moment or you don't. Someone else has ruined it for you. And having that moment of realizing, like you said, that whole sequence of Malcolm realizing that he's dead, that he never made it out of that first scene, is really amazing. It's cut well. It's acted incredibly. Bruce Willis, my God, to your point, I really think he's dead. I saw his spirit leave. And yet, the emotional like punch of it is just so it's fun. Like, this is why we go to movies. It
pulls the rug out from underneath the entire movie that you've been watching. I mean, he dies pretty early on. So it's like, I would say, 85% of the movie that you've been watching is now like completely pulled out from underneath you. And so, so to have that taken away from you where you don't get that experience, or like you don't get the Luke, I'm kind of experience. It's like, well, that ruins like a childhood sometimes, So.
Yeah, that's true. Because everyone else got to experience it and you were like, I didn't get that moment. There's a certain amount of relational thing that you can't identify with, but they land that moment and they immediately get the F out. Like, we turn that screw and we see him say goodbye, and then we cut to a shot of them at their wedding. And that's just like a moment to, there's no real reason. There's no reason to have that shot. It's just like, let's give everyone a happy moment of them being together as our final image. Cause that's kind of her final image in this whole story is, we were happy once. Goodbye.
Yeah.
And then we're out. Yeah. It's beautiful, and really well crafted. I think, I don't know. There was another point I wanted to make and I completely forgot what it was.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. I really, really enjoyed it. I'm glad we did it. I wasn't super looking forward to it because I thought I already know the answer to this, but it's cool. Like doing 200, this is our 250th episode. I feel like 249 episodes ago, I probably wouldn't have had the same appreciation of the things that we're appreciating right now of this film. And the layers that happen and the decisions that were made. And yeah, I'm sure that there's some things that probably M. Night would have done different now. But for the most part, I think this is kind of a timeless film in a way where like, it just like puts a stamp on a point in cinema and says before or after.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right.
Absolutely.
I think maybe The Shining is another one. Psycho is probably another one. Star Wars, like up with those.
Yeah.
Echelon.
Alien, Blade Runner, and all the ones you just mentioned.
And
big tentpoles in cinema history.
Yeah. And yes, it has to do with all the things we talked about with camera movements and with performances and all that stuff. But a lot of it is the payoff at the end. I mean, like that's what people remember is like Bruce Willis being dead and I see dead people. Like that had never been done before.
It hadn't, but I think what's amazing about this movie is how well it did for something that had so little theatrics to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a simple story. This is all writing. This is just a writer's story.
Yeah. And
people went crazy for it. Like the amount of times I heard that kid on the radio saying he saw dead people. Like I still hear it. I hear that radio ad. Like it's me in bed curled up saying I still hear that radio ad. Like, and it's just amazing how it was just really good acting, really good writing, really good directing. And nothing happened in this movie that you probably couldn't do for $1 million budget, if not less on today's terms, let alone in those days. Like you probably could have done it for a fraction, like $300,000 in 99. Like it's amazing. It's just good story. Just tell a really good story. And people can flip out over it. Right.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree, man.
Nice. What with The Sixth Sense in mind, which by the way, this movie ruined that phrase. That used to be a very normal phrase, like, oh yeah, that guy's got a sixth sense about things. You can't really say that phrase anymore. Like that phrase died with this movie.
I agree. I agree.
What are you gonna recommend this week, man?
I'm going to recommend, and I'm surprised I hadn't recommended it before, but I'm going to recommend it's not like a scary movie or anything, but it was another movie that was made very simply and very quickly over the pandemic with Jake Gyllenhaal. I'm going to recommend The Guilty, which is, I believe it's still on Netflix. I'm not sure, but I think it came out on Netflix, and they made it in like 2 weeks. And it was during the pandemic where, like, I think the director at one point, he got sick, so he had to be in a trailer outside of and they had to like talk over a wall. Like it was like, just a great example of like, hey, here's a story. We're not going to let things get in the way. We're just going to make this, and we're going to use as little as possible. And we're just going to tell this little story. And I think it's really well done. And Jake Gyllenhaal, he's just a fantastic actor in so many ways, but he does a really great job carrying this entire film. So
nice call, man. Yeah, that's such and we did a bonus episode on our Patreon, which Patreon listeners, I'm sorry, I've had a rough year, and I will promise to make more bonus content for you soon. But we did a bonus episode on that was really fun because for the exact point you're making, like it's a simple movie. They made it super fast, which was pretty incredible, but it's just compelling. It's just you don't need a lot to tell a compelling story. Yeah. Oh, in a similar way, there is a new ghost movie out that I love. It's really solid. It's called Talk to Me, and it's by these Australian filmmakers. It takes place in Australia. And those guys, I
haven't seen it yet. It's not out here.
It might have left already the theater. And so it's probably in the tweener stage between release on streaming somewhere. Yeah, stinks. Cause I was like, maybe we could do that one sometime this month, but I think we lost our perfect moment. It's solid. Like, it's hard to come up with new original ideas. And I think they did a great job with telling their story, and the backstory of them making that thing blew my mind. Because it was a deal where they had funding, and the executives, the financiers were wanting them to make certain changes to their story that they were like, we can't do it. We're just going to have to figure this out on our own. And they did, and they crushed it. Like, to have Miranda Otto, step into your film and is just amazing. But yeah, great backstory to it as well, but it's a really fun ghost story. I highly recommend it.
I'm so confused because it says it came out in 2022, but it's coming out in theaters.
That might be
the second one.
Oh, that's funny. I suspect they put 2022 because that was the festival debut.
Oh,
sometimes that happens. I've noticed that on some movies where they'll on IMDb will put the premiere date of like a film festival instead of its actual theatrical debut. And so, yeah, it took a while between, I want to say they went to Sundance and just knocked it out of the park. And then got distribution, and it takes, forever to have your film get fully distributed, and for whatever reason. But yeah. Dude, yeah, you got to see that. I mean, if it comes out by the time we're on the last episode of our ghost stories, then we should cover it, just because why not? But I think I'd also like to talk about those guys because they're wild. My God. Yeah. So anyway, stay tuned. Next week, we continue our ghost stories with a little ghost story you may have heard of. It's a few brave gentlemen in the city of New York handling paranormal activity. Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters, baby. So stay tuned for that next week. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget, drop us a review, subscribe, leave us a note. If there's something you want us to talk about, film that you like, we're happy to take it into advisement. Our panel of judges and advisors, our board of directors will let us know if it gets approval. we have no board. And if you want to comment on this episode, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/the6th-sense.
And our quote of the day is from Sigmund Freud. I have found little that is good about human beings on the whole. In my experience, most of them are trash, no matter whether they are publicly subscribe to this or that ethical doctrine, or to none at all. That is something that you cannot say aloud, or perhaps even think. I don't subscribe to that doctrine.
Subscribe to that
at all. And it's not because it's Sigmund Freud, and I think that a lot of what he, studied and everything is like more for shock and awe factor sometimes.
Yeah, agreed.
I just don't agree with that at all.
That's such a wild thing, like for a therapist or a psychologist to be like,
yeah,
I've found little that's good about people. In my experience, they're trash. Like the use of trash there is so like, what?
Yeah. Like, and talk for, I don't know, for someone who's scientific, who's supposed to be scientific, to label an entire species, like that just doesn't jive. That's like, and I was thinking about this actually the other day, maybe it was yesterday, the whole idea that, that like nature is not evil, because it just is, it has one goal, which is to survive and, whatever. I don't also necessarily subscribe to that. I think that there are probably creatures that just kill for the sake of killing. And just because they're a creature doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be, like bad. You know what I mean? Or like, so I guess my point is that I don't necessarily think that nature is not evil, and I also don't necessarily think that human beings are inherently evil, right? I think that there are plenty of people who, even though they are imperfect, are more good than they are bad. And so if that's the case, then this completely falls flat, because he's also just speaking in his experience, like maybe you haven't, like dealt with the right types of people. I mean, you're a psychologist, and your whole goal really is to study like the most effed up people that you could probably get your hands on. In that case, yeah, your worldview is going to be pretty skewed. I don't know.
It is interesting because I don't know that kids are born one way or the other, like in terms of their intent or morality, their sense of good and evil. It takes a while to develop those things, and that's the whole nature nurture debate. And I think generally everyone falls on it's both, right? And like you're influenced to a large degree by both, how you were born, what you're made of, your DNA, as well as the things you go through, and those things combine into something else, into you. And watching this film, even like there's that moment where Malcolm is making notes to himself, and he talks about how Cole may be going through some kind of childhood schizophrenia. And I thought that was just an interesting thing to say, because I never really considered about childhood schizophrenia. I've done work with, psychiatric, psychologists, and told stories about, people having schizophrenic breaks. And there's all these little things that can happen when you're younger, but by and large, it seems like most people, once they have some kind of schizophrenic break, is when they're older. It's after a lot of experiences combined with whatever may be going on chemically with them. But the experiences matter. The things you go through as a kid really, really impact those elements, even though it's not always the case. It's complicated. And yeah, it does feel like he's kind of skipping out a lot about that whole process. So just to kind of boil it down to, in my experience, most of them are trash, because even them, he's still qualifying. He's still saying most. He's not saying all. And I found the little that's good. Yeah.
What is the little?
What is that little? Why can't you talk about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also like there are a lot of demands on people in this world that if they didn't exist, maybe those people wouldn't behave that way.
Yeah.
I mean, for the obvious being money, I think that people say money is the root of all evil. It doesn't mean money's evil. It just means that like people feel like they need to make money, and to do that, sometimes they have to do bad things. Some people, like say there was no money, say that wasn't a thing in our world, like things would be different, but people have to feel like a lot of times, and because of their experience, I'm very much a nurture type person. I think that nature has a little bit, but it's mostly nurture.
Yeah.
I think that has everything to do with why people do what they do. Sometimes you as a person might, feel like you want to be accepted by society. And so you do things that you normally wouldn't do in order to, so anyway.
Yeah. I love that. And even to go back to the original, like biblical version that I always read was, it's the root of all sorts of evil. And so it's the desire for it even, right? It's like you and I both know this is a non-living entity. It's what people will do for this thing. And you could substitute money for anything at that point. And suddenly it's just how they're approaching this or that, but also just how you're approaching them. Because if Freud is approaching everyone with this assumption underlying that this is probably a trash person, that's going to shade your interaction with them as well. And now maybe you're just living a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And also circumstance, like you have two people. One person makes $1 million a year and works 80 hours a week. Another person and alienates their children. Another person works 80 hours a week and alienates their children. Who is in the wrong?
Right.
They're both doing the exact bad thing, alienating their children because they're working too hard. But this person has no money and only works two jobs so that they can put food on the table for their child, even though they're alienating them. It is a completely different perspective.
That person poisons their kid with pine sol.
Yeah. Dear God. Yeah. Anyway. Great think
hilarious.
piece there. We should do like some what is it? Some extra little episodes of us just like talking about quotes of the day that we like.
Deep diving, yeah. Like we could go through a whole Marcus Aurelius book.
Ooh,
that guy. My God.
Damn. Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome.
Cool. Good episode.
That was great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope you liked it. That was a lot of fun for us. Make sure to subscribe, review, all that good stuff. It all helps, and suggest a film that you'd like to see us pick apart. Maybe we'll do it. Until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.